As the winter of 1865 turned into the spring of 1866, it appeared as if the Indian War of 1865 was finally drawing to a close. On the 29th of December 1865, Colonel Henry Maynadier had sent word that Red Cloud had made an offer of peace and friendship, a welcoming signal to the end of the fighting. On the 1st of March 1866, soldiers at Fort Laramie observed a large group of Brules under Standing Elk approach with a flag of truce. Colonel Maynadier provided them with food and coffee and sent word to the rest of the Brule to come to Fort Laramie to discuss peace. Soon, Chief Spotted Tail sent word that he wished to come to the post to bury his daughter, Minneacawan. On the 8th of March, Spotted Tail arrived at Fort Laramie. Spotted Tail's daughter had grown up near the post, and her final wish was to be buried there. Maynadier ordered a coffin and scaffold platform to be built near the post cemetery where Old Smoke's burial scaffold stood. Her coffin was draped in red cloth, donated by William Bullock, one of the post settlers. Minneacawan was carried to her scaffold by an artillery caisson, followed by 300 of Spotted Tail's band and many officers and enlisted men of the post. The burial of Minneacawan was the first major step in establishing peace. Soon Red Cloud would come to the post to speak with Colonel Maynadier, and this peace council was slated to begin on the 20th of May. Join us as we begin Episode 4 of Red Cloud's War, the Peace Treaty of 1866.
Well, every road I see leads away from me.
You're listening to the Tales of the Trails podcast, produced by Duke Frazier Productions in association with the 11 Bang Bang YouTube channel. I'm your host, Duke Frazier.
Saying, friend, come see what's round the bend. So is it any wonder that I roam?
As the Peace Council drew near, more and more natives began to arrive at Fort Laramie. An estimated 500 people encamped on the east bank of the Laramie River, directly across from the main post. Other bands camped further along down the Platte. The natives came to the post and traded off buffalo robes and moccasins with the settler and the soldiers. Despite the overall feeling of peace, it was not without moment's tension. On the 1st of May, an estimated 500 warriors arrived with strung bows and hands filled with arrows. They met with Colonel Maynadier, who had made promises that the natives felt had not been fulfilled. Maynadier would provide the natives with a few head of cattle, temporarily alleviating the situation. On the night of the 29th of May, the first real threat to the progression of peace would occur. Several Brule men were attempting to visit the lodge of a relative when they strayed too close to the post. Unaware of their proximity, soldiers on guard duty fired upon the group, killing one and wounding two others. Spotted Tail's band was furious. Colonel Maynadier managed to quell their anger, offering rations, 10 head of cattle, and 2 horses in payment for the man that was killed. Despite having initially set the date to begin the Peace Council for the 20th of May, it wasn't until the 30th that the Peace Commissioners arrived. The commissioners were Edward B. Taylor, R.N. McLaren, and Thomas Weister. The shade structure was built in front of Old Bedlam, the commanding officer's quarters and post headquarters at Fort Laramie. The Peace Commissioners began organizing on the 1st of June, and on the 5th the proceedings would begin. The 19 chiefs that would take part in the negotiations were Red Cloud, Spotted Tail, Man Afraid of His Horses, Standing Elk, Red Leaf, Trunk, Fair Day, The Tongue, The Man That Walks Under the Ground, Sharp Nose, 2 and 2, White Eye, Big Mouth, Bad Wound, Setting Bear, Bad Hand, The Man That Looks to the Bottom, Fresh Beef, and Greasy Nose. Serving as interpreters were Joseph Bissonnette, Jeminin Beauvoir, Charles Gurn, Leon Pallardy, and Jones Borbell. While the Peace Commission had come to bring a formal end to the conflict of 1865, their true purpose was to negotiate a safe road from Fort Laramie to the Montana goldfields, the Bozeman Trail. As Taylor read out his prepared speech, he ended it with the following. The The Great Father does not wish to keep soldiers in this country. He will be satisfied if the mails and telegraph are not molested. We do not ask you to give up your country or sell it. We only ask for roads to travel back and forwards, and no roads will be made except by orders from the Great Father, so as not to disturb the game, and whatever damage are done by roads will be paid by the Great Father. When the council convened the next day, Red Cloud made a short and direct statement. Yesterday we talked about small matters, and today we want to talk about big matters. My people on both sides of the road have bows and arrows, and we came in here and told you all we wanted. We are 21 bands. All we want is peace. We have come here for you to give us instructions that we may live. The natives made it clear they did not want roads through their hunting grounds, and they wanted the soldiers at Fort Connor withdrawn. While the negotiations remained peaceful, it would soon come to a disastrous end. On the 19th of May, Colonel Henry Carrington of the 18th U.S. Infantry began his march from Fort Kearny. He had been given orders to proceed west and to construct multiple forts along the Bozeman Trail. Despite the promises made by the Doves, those in favor of peaceful negotiations in Washington, the Hawks, those who preferred to use force, had already arranged for military occupation of the Bozeman Trail. Carrington would arrive in the vicinity of Fort Laramie on the 13th of June. Realizing the negotiations were still underway, Carrington requested permission to halt his march until the negotiations were completed. The response was to march at once. When Carrington arrived at the post, he was introduced to many of the chiefs. As the chiefs learned of his purpose to occupy the Bozeman Trail, they became cold. It was apparent they had been lied to. Margaret Carrington wrote that one chief had said to her, "The Great Father sends us presents and wants the new road, but White Chief goes with soldiers to steal the road before the Indian can say yes or no." Colonel Carrington would march out of Fort Laramie on the 16th of June with his 8 companies. Red Cloud was not present at the post when Carrington arrived. As he received word of Carrington's purpose, he became infuriated. Realizing that the whites had lied to him, Red Cloud took his people north. He would fight for the Powder River country. When William Rowland, an interpreter, was sent to bring in a group of Cheyenne by the peace commissioners, he was met by a group of Red Cloud's band. They knocked him to the ground and told him he would go no further. After Red Cloud departed, the remaining chiefs would meet to elect new leaders to sign the treaty. On the 27th of June, they would meet at Fort Laramie to sign the document. Signing for the Brule were Spotted Tail, Swift Bear, Dog Hawk, Hawk Thunder, Standing Elk, Tall Mandan, and Braveheart. Signing for the Ogalallas were Big Mouth, the Man That Walks Into the Ground, Black Warbonnet, Standing Cloud, Blue Horse, and Big Hand. The first 2 articles of the treaty called for the cessation of all hostilities and for the U.S. to act as an arbitrator in any differences between the tribes. The 3rd article stated the bands represented would withdraw from all overland routes established and to be established through their country in return for payment of $70,000 for both bands over 20 years. The Cheyenne chiefs Cut Nose, Soldier, Big Wolf, War Shield, Bad Spotted Horse, the Shaved White Man, Horse Road, Bob, and Elk That Halts would sign a similar treaty with compensation of $15,000. Article 4 would provide for farming incentives, Article 5 provided restitution for violations of the treaty, and Article 6 established the process for distribution of immunities. On the 29th of June, Taylor would send a telegraph stating the treaty had been established. The commissioners left Fort Laramie on the 2nd of July. While Taylor reported that the treaty was successful and all had parted with cordial feelings, it was already apparent that it had been a waste of time. Jim Bridger shared in the general sentiment of many, stating, "The chiefs who signed the treaty and the Indians who received the principal portion of the presents were Laramie loafers and road beggars, a class of Indians who hang around Fort Laramie and gain their living by begging and stealing." He also stated that the treaty would not amount to anything. but that all Indians wanted was to receive presents and procure a supply of powder and lead, and then they would take the warpath and would plunder trains and murder immigrants going over the road. While Taylor had succeeded in getting the treaty signed, it was signed by those who did not occupy the territory along the Bozeman Trail. By the time that Spotted Tail, Swift Bear, and Standing Elk had reached the Republican River, all the young warriors of their bands had headed north, leaving the chiefs with only 10 lodges of mostly older women and men. The commissioners had failed in their efforts, and the hope for peace was gone. As Carrington continued his march north, he wrote to his superiors in the Department of the Platte reminding them of his need of supplies. When he had reached Fort Laramie, he had been told there was ample ammunition for his troops. He quickly discovered that the post only had 1,000 rounds of .58 caliber musket ammunition available to him. When he reached Fort Reno, formerly Fort Connor, he found an additional 36,000 rounds. This gave him a total of 60,000 rounds for 8 companies of soldiers. The average company consisting of 100 men, equaling out to an average of 75 rounds per man. On the 30th of June, it would become apparent to Carrington that the peace treaty had failed. 5 Lakota warriors, along with a woman and a boy, would run off the stock of post-settler Alfred Layton. Soldiers were scrambled to recover the stock, but returned with just an Indian pony loaded with goods issued at the peace negotiations at Fort Laramie. On the 2nd of July, warriors would attack a wagon train at Buffalo Springs, killing 1. Warriors would kill 2 civilians and run off the stock near Fort Reno on that same day. Carrington would resume his march north on July 9th. During the march, 4 deserters who had left in the cover of darkness returned to the column. They had been discovered by warriors and were granted their freedom in order to carry a message to Carrington: turn back now or suffer the consequences. Carrington would ignore the warning. On the 13th of July, Carrington would reach the Piney Fork of Clear Fork of the Powder River. After a day of surveying, he would choose a spot along the Big Piney to establish his headquarters, Fort Phil Kearny. Carrington felt that the location had sufficient grass, water, and timber available. On the 15th of July, Captain Tenador Tenike, a civil engineer prior to his military career, began the process of constructing Fort Phil Kearny. On the 16th of July, several Cheyenne chiefs arrived under a white flag of truce to talk with Carrington. Black Horse, Red Arm, Little Moon, Pretty Bear, the Rabbit that Jumps, the Wolf that Lies Down, the Man that Stands Alone on the Ground, Dull Knife, Bobtail, Dead White Leg, the Brave Soldier, and the Man that Strikes Hard told Carrington through interpreter Jack Stead that they wished to be friends with the whites and asked for protection. The Lakota had been pressuring them to join the fight. They stated that if Carrington would give them supplies, they would give Carrington 100 warriors to fight Red Cloud. Carrington refused the offer of warriors, but offered to help if they had trouble. The chiefs signed an agreement with Carrington stating they would leave the area and camp on the upper plateau of the Bighorn Mountains. Captain Henry Hayman, who had been left at Crazy Woman Fork to repair wagons with 4 companies, arrived as the Cheyenne chiefs began to leave. Hayman would make camp at the crossing of the Big Piney. The following morning at 5 o'clock, Lakota warriors would steal 174 horses. Hayman, along with his orderly and 25 mounted infantrymen, began an immediate pursuit of the warriors. The chase would last for 15 miles. When Hayman came face to face with 300 warriors. Hayman would withdraw, recovering about 100 head of the stolen stock. 2 soldiers and a teamster were killed in the skirmish. As Hayman returned, he was met by another column under Lieutenant John Adair. They would soon discover the plundered wagons of Indian trader Pierre Cazot, known as French Pete. Cazot and his 4 companions had been trading with the Cheyennes when a group of Lakota arrived. The Lakota plundered the wagons, stating that they would allow Cazot to live. The next day they returned and killed him and his companions. Hayman discovered Cazot's wife and 3 children near the wagons. Later that evening, they found the mutilated bodies of the traders. The soldiers would return to Fort Phil Kearny with the bodies of Henry Harrison, Cazot's business partner, and Joseph Donaldson, a former government teamster. The rest were buried where they were found. It was now clear to Carrington he would have to fight to maintain control of the Bozeman Trail. Red Cloud's War had begun. Next time on Tales of the Trails. As the soldiers begin construction of the stockade at Fort Phil Kearny, Red Cloud continues to harass the post. As 1866 begins to draw to a close, Captain William Judd Fetterman leads his troops into disaster. Join us in the next episode of Red Cloud's War, the Fetterman Fight.
All the places I have been.
Tales of the Trails is produced by Duke Frazier Productions. Music performed by Garrett Woods from the 11 Bang Bang YouTube channel. Sources for this episode may be found in the description field below. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe. Click the bell to receive notification of new episodes. Until next time, keep your powder dry.